This episode is brought to you by the new true crime docuseries American Nightmare, only on Netflix. In 2015, the Vallejo, California Police Department received a strange phone call about a kidnapping. But when the truth is stranger than fiction, you won't know who to trust or what is real. A fast-paced true crime thriller with cliffhangers at every turn. Watch American Nightmare now, only on Netflix.
I didn't realize how precious that moment was. Her golden blonde hair blowing in the wind.
January 2nd, 1999, a call came out for a missing child.
Just let her come home.
We stopped people. We wanted to talk to people that normally traverse through the area.
Please let her go, bring her home.
You're listening to True Crime Arizona, the podcast.
We were always outside playing. It was a good neighborhood. We knew pretty much everyone that lived like on our street and throughout the neighborhood. You know, a lot of them were from our church group, and you know, it was a close-knit community.
Kimber Biggs remembers those days, blissful joy and innocence of the late 90s.
What is it about your childhood that you think of?
These flowers, actually. I remember them. We used to pick them and put them in our hair.
The Biggs home was full of kids, full of personality and imagination.
Mikelle is the oldest, and I'm 2 years younger. And then I have a younger brother and a younger sister. My younger sister, Linnell, was only 9 months old at the time.
Their home in Mesa, Arizona was small, but just enough for the family of 6.
So the first one was my bedroom, and then the second one was Mikelle's room, but when we shared a room, that was the room we were in.
Kimber was 9 at the time. Mikelle was 11. They were quite a bit older than their other siblings.
We were close. You know, she was that good big sister, but at the same time, like, I've always talked about how we were more or less polar opposites. Like, she was very, very good, quiet child, like, always listened, never, like, talked back, and, you know, super neat and organized, and I was not any of that. So we were close, but also enemies at the same time, especially when we shared a bedroom.
Sharing was something the girls often did with their toys. Mikelle particularly liked Kimber's new bike. And on this January afternoon, the weather was crisp and cool, perfect for a bike ride. Mikelle wanted to take it for a spin.
It was right after Christmas, so what I remember for that day was playing with all my new toys. And whenever it was that Mikelle got home, she wanted to go outside and ride my bike. She had asked me to come outside with her, I think, and I didn't want to. I was inside, I think, playing with like Barbie dolls. You know, it was pretty normal. You know, it was sometimes we would go out together, sometimes we wouldn't. All I really remember was, you know, there were multiple kids outside. They were kind of coming and going. And I was not on a bike or anything, so I just went out and, you know, was kind of watching her ride my bike.
Mikelle heard a familiar sound. Music from the ice cream truck nearby. Several of the neighborhood kids ran outside.
I guess that's why Mikelle went outside. In
the first place?
Yeah. She heard the ice cream truck. I think that's why I decided to go outside, was I realized, oh, Mom gave Mikelle money and she's outside waiting for the ice cream truck. So that's when I went to join.
The sounds of the ice cream truck were fading away. Unsure if it was even going to come, Kimber noticed the sky changing.
It started to get darker, you know, it was evening, dusk, and the sun was going down, and we knew when the street lights came on, that was our curfew. You know, it's dark, street lights are on, it's time to come in. And I don't think they were actually on yet, but I remember saying the street lights are going to come on soon. And, you know, I was whining that it was getting cold. And, I mean, it was January and evening, but we were both out there in short sleeve shirts. Like,
Arizona.
Yeah, Arizona, totally. And I whined at her that it was time to go in, and she wouldn't come in. She was like, no, not yet. Like, you know, I'm the big sister, I'll do what I want, kind of thing. And I think we argued about it for a minute. I don't really remember, but it was basically like, I know if you don't come in with me, I'm just going to have to come back out here and get you when I get home. Like, Mom's going to tell me. And that's exactly what happened. You know, I was like, fine, I'm going inside. And I remember right before I walked off, I was like, I turned around and I looked back at her to like, I was going to cross the road. So I was just making sure there were no cars coming, and I saw her, you know, going in a circle. And I crossed the road and walked, and that was the last time I looked back.
Kimber remembers exactly what Mikelle looked like when she left her. It was almost picturesque. Kimber didn't think much of it at the time. Now, it seems fitting, like the finale of a film.
Her blonde hair in the sunset was very, like, flowing behind her, you know, and she was, like, you know when you stand up when you're riding a bike? Mm-hmm. She was doing that. And just like gliding, you know, it was very much like innocent child. I didn't realize how precious that moment was, you know, and it is very much like a movie scene. Like, I mean, her golden blonde hair blowing in the wind. I didn't know anything was going to change in that moment. It was definitely very pivotal for my childhood. If not the end of my innocence, I guess.
Kimber left Mikelle to walk home. It wasn't far at all.
How far was where she was riding the bike from your house?
Like 2 or 3 houses down.
Very close?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can see the T in the road where she was riding from the driveway. And as soon as I opened the door, my mom's like, nope, go get Mikelle. Like, she has to come in. And I remember being very annoyed because I knew that was what was going to happen.
So you walked back?
Yeah, I walked back. I yelled from the driveway, Mikelle, you know, all annoyed. And then that's when I turned and I looked, you know, and I didn't see her down there, so I looked the other way and I was like, okay, like, where's she, you know?
Right.
I was instantly mad that she wasn't coming.
Irritated Mikelle wasn't listening, Kimber walked toward where she had last seen her sister.
What is that in the road? And as I started to walk towards it, when I recall it, it's like I'm floating. I realized it was my bike, and I was confused and mad that she left my bike in the road, kind of thing. I just saw like something, and the tire on it was still spinning, and, you know, it was dusk, so it was getting darker, and I remember it. At that point, even though I didn't know anything was wrong, I just remember feeling, I don't even know the word, just off. Something felt off. As I yelled into the silence, just...
And there was no response.
Yeah, no response, and my thought was, she's probably hiding around the corner, she's going to jump out and scare me.
She was over the prank she thought Mikelle was playing. It wasn't funny anymore. She went to their neighbors, the Millers' house, to see if Mikelle had gone there. They'd play with the Millers often.
I walked to their house, and they were like, she's not here. And, you know, we just saw her outside a few minutes ago.
They all walked outside, and on the ground, found something shiny. 2 quarters. The quarters Kimber and Mikelle's mom had given Mikelle for the ice cream truck.
And I just remember him very sternly saying, go home and tell your mom we can't find Mikelle.
She ran home to her mom right away.
And I said, we can't find Mikelle. And her face went white.
Just let her come home.
We stopped people. We wanted to talk to people that normally traverse through the area.
Please let her go, bring her home.
The date has now become unforgettable.
January 2nd, 1999. Call came out for a missing child. Myself and my trainee, we headed that way.
Steve Barry was a detective for the Mesa Police Department. It wasn't particularly unusual to get a missing child call, so the magnitude of the situation wasn't immediately obvious.
When did you get to the scene, and what did you notice right away?
Of course, we responded right away. Several officers began flooding the area, like we always do, as the responding officer goes to the house and contacts the parents or reporting party to try and find out the situation and where the child might be. Oftentimes they are at a friend's house, a neighbor's house, they might be playing in a backyard. Usually those of us who are out searching, by the time we start getting those bits and pieces of information, we can typically narrow in on where that child is and get them back home safely. This case pretty quickly felt different from the time that we arrived as the information again started coming out, and we learned that this little girl, Mikelle Biggs, her bicycle was literally found in the middle of the road, and she was nowhere to be found. There was no one else out, no one else around, and no one had seen anything, and that's typically not the case.
Volunteers have distributed thousands of missing child posters with Mikelle's photo.
Not only were police officers looking for Mikelle, but family, friends, and neighbors had joined the search for her too.
I recall the helicopter flying overhead and looking around and making announcements, and all the officers, we specifically going up and down alleyways and anywhere and everywhere that a little girl could go. We checked all of those places, and now it's getting to be 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and you're talking about a little girl that's typically home with her family, and that starts to feel very different. You're like, something's different here.
Mikelle's mom and dad talked to the media. Neighbors talked to the media. Any exposure could help.
It's just not in her nature to just leave like that. She's very responsible.
Everybody on this street and surrounding streets, people I've never even seen before, coming up and telling me they live in the area and they want to help and what can they do, and I don't know what to say except thanks, and I know it's going to a good end.
Kimber could barely even process what was going on. She knew it was serious, as investigators were questioning her, but she was still pretty young.
I don't know at what point I heard the word kidnapped, but I really didn't grasp that concept before that night.
Detectives determined Kimber only lost sight of Mikelle for about 90 seconds before she disappeared.
And I remember being only 9 years old, I knew that there's no time to be sad. It's just important that we find her.
Kids are always listening. She could hear what investigators were telling her parents in another room.
I just kept hearing 3 days, and I didn't really know what that meant. And I heard someone, I want to say it was one of the detectives or policemen, talking to one or both of my parents, and they were talking about 3 days, and I remember sitting there and realizing that they were saying that we have a 3-day window before they're going to assume she's dead. And I remember just being 9 years old thinking, we have 3 days to find her or she's dead? Like, why? Why 3 days? Why would she be dead? What happened? All that was going through my head.
3 days did pass. In fact, weeks passed. Then months.
She needs her mother. She's innocent. She doesn't deserve this. No child does.
This isn't over until we have our daughter back in our home. Whatever extent we have to go to, that's what I'll do. Whether that takes another hour or another year.
4 by 4 mile chunk of Sonoran Desert.
Investigators were combing the East Valley, even the desert, looking for any signs of Mikelle, but nothing was coming up. Steve Barry and his detectives had received a lot of the same question in those first few months.
I know she and Kimber were waiting for the ice cream truck to come. Was there ever a thought that either the ice cream truck or an ice cream delivery type person could have been involved in the disappearance?
Absolutely. Any tidbit of information like that is always going to be looked at. In this case, as you said, there was a report of the ice cream truck in the area. You can rest assured that anyone and everyone within the state of Arizona in reasonable proximity with an ice cream truck, we were looking at all of those things to find out who was in the area. We were able to locate them. We were able to find out where they were, who they were. But again, those were all leads that ultimately that went nowhere.
So the ice cream truck was ruled out?
That was absolutely ruled out.
For about a year, the leads went cold until a new incident, a terrifying incident, happened very close to the Biggs home.
What do you think happened to Mikelle that night? Do you have a feeling or an intuition of what took place?
I feel like I'm still unsure. For years, We, thought it was, stranger abduction, and, Dee Blaylock gets brought up a lot.
Who is Dee Blaylock? Kimber had never heard the name before, but it's a name that would become a huge part of the investigation and never go away.
With thousands of leads coming in, Mesa police know they need to narrow their search.
I am assigned the cold case of Mikelle Biggs. This is the largest missing persons case in the history of Arizona.
Teresa Van Gelder is the current Mesa PD detective working the Mikelle Biggs investigation.
All of the interview transcripts that have taken place. We have copies of the original audio recordings. We have over 300 tapes in here.
She walks down a hallway full of cabinets and lockers at the police department. It's a hallway full of information dedicated to anything related to Mikelle Biggs.
This entire wall that you see here contains file folders all dealing with this specific case.
There is one piece of the puzzle investigators are fairly certain about. Search dogs did pick up Mikelle's scent, but lost it very quickly.
Does everything lead to that she was picked up and put in a car and taken as opposed to dragged or forced somewhere nearby in the area?
Yes. With the amount of the limited amount of time that this took place in before people were out looking for her, yes, and nobody seeing or hearing her put up a struggle, everything indicates that she was placed in a vehicle.
That means somebody would have had to pick Mikelle up almost immediately after Kimber walked away. That person had to be close by. Eventually, eyes turned to Dee Blaylock.
Can you explain who he is and his potential involvement in this case?
Yes. Dee Blaylock lived in the same neighborhood as the Biggs, about 4 little neighborhood blocks down, and was in the direct line of the intersection where Mikelle was taken from. He was a registered sex offender. He had numerous cases going back over the years from the time he was younger. And his different cases, when you look at them, they were very random. Some of his victims he did not know. They were strangers. Some he did know. They ranged in different ages and sex. So he was an opportunist from researching his background. And so his profile basically fit. He had the location was close to it as opposed to his history. He was spoken to that night. Detectives did go to his house, and at that time, his wife and his sister-in-law were home, and they informed the detectives that he was home all night. And so basically they gave him his alibi that he was accounted for by them. He allowed the detectives to search his home, so they went through and just did a visual check, make sure that there was no evidence of Mikelle being in the home or having been there. And so at that point in time, they felt comfortable that he was not involved.
But about a year later, his name came back up for another brutal assault.
I don't believe that before Mikelle was taken, we knew him. He apparently was at candlelight vigils and stuff that we had for her leading up to the attack on his neighbor, and that made him suspicious. We didn't hear about him until months later, and I didn't hear about him for a long time. Obviously not something that the 9-year-old child needs to be hearing, but it was when he attacked his neighbor, Susan Quinnett, that's when he got on the radar.
He attempted to murder her and left her for dead. She called 911 and she was able to verbally identify him. And later we had DNA evidence linking Dee Blaylock to that assault. So again, now he was back on our radar that he was active and he was violent, very violent.
Blaylock is in prison for the rest of his life for that attack on Susan. Detective Van Gelder describes him as a pathological liar.
In 2018, I went and spoke with him. He still denies any kind of involvement. So even when presented with DNA evidence, he claimed innocence and that it was, bad investigation. And when you look back at his previous cases as well, he never accepted any kind of responsibility for his acts. He would always lie.
Is it your professional opinion that he is involved in her disappearance?
I don't know. I think he is our most likely investigative lead, but obviously we want to keep the investigation, our eyes open to other leads.
Van Gelder wasn't the only one to pay Dee Blaylock a visit behind bars.
Your parents went to talk to him in jail. They believed that he did it. What did they recall in that conversation they had with him?
All I really remember of what they've said about that was that he seemed, I think, like split personality almost. Like he would act like he was going to give him information and then he'd turn around and act like he didn't know anything. I believe before they met, they exchanged some letters, and he more or less made it seem like he would tell them what happened. And then they got there and he was like, no, I'm innocent, I didn't do this. And my mom, I believe, described him as basically, being kind of shifty, like he was lying. The lack of eye contact and the body language just seemed like he was lying. I think they both kind of said that they got just a dark feeling, a bad feeling about him.
One of the quotes I read, I think, was your mom saying that he had said, like, I can't be responsible for what my other personality does.
Yeah, something like that.
Does that ring a bell?
Yeah. So it was definitely like, there's plenty of circumstantial evidence, plenty of suspicion there, and, it would make sense. He's made it pretty clear he's not going to say anything. I don't think he'll ever confess if he did do it.
Do you think he did it?
I used to believe that he did. Now I have questioned that, simply for the fact of just knowing everything that goes on in the world, knowing about sex trafficking and human trafficking in general. Just, I've learned about that, and I'm like, that could have been the case.
There were tips that came in along those lines, too.
Other leads that are common are Midnight Productions, a pornography company that was an underground pornography company. There was rumors that Mikelle was abducted by these individuals that ran that, and that then she was part of a snuff film.
No evidence of that, though.
Nobody can ever produce this film.
People even called Mesa PD, claiming their own family members may have been involved.
There was another individual that was looked at back during that first year of her going missing. There was a woman that called in regarding her own father. He was also a sex offender, and months after Mikelle went missing, he sexually assaulted his own great-grandchild in the state of Texas. And he was arrested and released, and while he was released on bond, he committed suicide. But prior to committing suicide, he made the statement to family members that there were other victims and that he was going to write a list, but he never wrote the list. And according to his daughter, who lives in Mesa, near Mikelle's, the Biggs residence, she recalled on that night hearing the helicopter going overhead, hearing the announcements for the missing child, and her dad was visiting her at that time. And he had been out in one of her vehicles, and he was gone from afternoon until about 8 p.m. And she said that when he got home, she asked him where he had been all day, and his comment to her was, "I got lost." And she said, "My dad knew the area. He did not get lost." So again, she rose suspicion on her own father that he may have been involved. Detectives actually went out to Texas and did a search warrant on his residence. Again, nothing was found linking him to Mikelle's case, but you just don't know.
What about that car?
Nothing was found. No kind of trace evidence. But nobody can ever lead me to her. It's just all these rumors or loose leads.
As leads dried up and hope faded over the years, Kimber watched the trauma take over their family. Her dad hinted at it in several interviews over time.
You have no idea how it feels to lose your daughter. You have no clue unless it's happened to you. This is just tearing us and our family apart.
I would say that aside from the worst thing being that she was gone, was that I could see what it was doing to my parents.
Her parents would eventually divorce, and it wouldn't be until 2018 that a bizarre new lead would come to light. Detective Steve Barry wondered why a Wisconsin number was calling him.
I got a call from Wisconsin, I believe it was, one day, a reporter asking me about the Mikelle Biggs case, and I'm like, this is just really random. And of course it turned out to be the infamous dollar bill that we now know of, that had some handwriting on it.
The dollar bill lead.
The dollar bill.
It came out of nowhere. A 2009 dollar bill was found in Wisconsin with writing around the border that said, "My name is Mikelle Biggs, kidnapped from Mesa, AZ. I'm alive."
When that tip first came in, were you skeptical from the start?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The fact that her name was spelled wrong was a big thing. I mean, she was 11 years old when she was abducted. So it's not like she was 4 or 5 and just learning how to spell her name. She was an intelligent young girl doing well in school. She's not going to forget how to spell her name.
Kimber also didn't believe it really was Mikelle. It wasn't her handwriting.
My gut reaction to that was, it's a hoax. Initially I was like, wow, whoever did this is worthless. I remember just being so upset that someone would mess with us like that.
Nothing more came of the dollar bill. No other clues, and no other information about where Mikelle could be.
But nobody can ever lead me to her. You know, it's just all these rumors or loose leads. At this point in time, we're pretty much at dead ends.
Detective Van Gelder knows what they need to solve the case. She doesn't think it's impossible, even after all this time.
How often are you still getting tips in on this case?
Almost weekly. It's a constant flow. The only way we're going to solve this would be is if we get somebody that gives a confession and leads us to her, whether it's her or her remains.
Detective Barry says even the smallest detail could break the case wide open.
We absolutely need something new. Well, who knows what that little piece of information will be that comes forward. It could be something that is jarred in a mind, someone who has that moment of clarity in their life now for whatever point that they want to bring some information forward. We don't really care how or why it comes forward. We just need that little nugget of something that might lead us to where Mikelle is.
It's now 2021, a thought that haunts everyone involved in this case for so many reasons. One thought, it's now been 22 years of desperately searching for any clues. Mikelle would be 33 years old. But another thought, how much different things could be if this abduction had happened now.
There's almost nothing that's not captured anymore somewhere. If someone's fleeing a scene, they go through a red light camera because they're fleeing a scene, they're trying to get away, and they get captured that way, or the neighbor's camera, or they drive through the gas station and the convenience store, and it might capture their vehicle going through. None of those things were really around back in '99. Nobody even knew what a Ring camera was.
No.
It didn't exist back then. And you look at modern society today, if you go up and down any street in urban America, there's hundreds of cameras.
Right.
They're everywhere. It's much easier in today's world to follow someone's actions. And certainly if you have a strong investigative lead or something, you know, you can follow cell phone technology and a lot of other things that would tell you where a person's been nowadays. And back then, that wasn't very prevalent.
Neither was social media. Kimber runs the Justice for Mikelle Biggs Facebook page.
I get more comments and messages than I could ever count. I do feel like that, you know, if it hadn't been for the time, that it would be very likely that we would have answers.
Both investigators and the Biggs family believe at this point Mikelle is not alive. They also don't believe she's far away.
Do you think she's still in Arizona, whether she is alive or dead?
I would think so, yes. Again, based on the abduction, odds are that if she was killed, she was probably killed locally and the body dumped somewhere locally.
Mikelle Biggs was an innocent victim. She was out riding her bike, as any 11-year-old would do. But she wasn't the only victim in this.
Do you ever struggle with a feeling of guilt that you walked in without Mikelle, and obviously not intentionally, just given the fact that that 90 seconds to maybe 2 minutes amount of time was enough for her to be there and then be gone.
I dealt with that for a long time. I've gotten better with it, obviously understanding the circumstances were beyond my control. I had no way of knowing, and, if I had been out there, what if it was both of us? Years later, now that I've only been in therapy for almost 2 years, I think, and, it was my choice. I decided it was time for me to go, and I made that happen. And it was interesting to realize how much comes up, and it's helped a lot. Why didn't I put myself as a priority? And I know that in my head, the only thing that was important was finding Mikelle, and now I'm understanding, but my mental health and my issues are important too. And I never dealt with them as a child. Like I said, survival mode. I blocked it out, and now, all of that is, coming out, and I'm seeing how it's affected me.
We didn't just sit down with Kimber to do our interview with her. She agreed to take us back to where it happened, in front of her old home in Mesa.
So this is it, right?
Yeah. Yep. The house itself looks the same.
We stood together outside, taking it in.
So we had a big tree, and at some point, soon after she was taken, a bunch of people tied yellow ribbons all in the trees. The lighting right now, it's very blue. That is one of those things I remember very distinctly from that night. It was I describe it as a blue haze. I've gone to her gravesite, for her birthday and the anniversary, but I don't think I've ever actually come here, alone.
She took us down the street, just a couple houses away, right to where she last saw her sister. It brings back thoughts she had that day, things she can remember.
There was no cars that drove past me. I crossed the road and walked down the sidewalk and up the driveway, and I didn't hear or see any cars going that way. Was someone waiting, or, did someone literally stumble upon a child alone?
She still struggles with where she hopes Mikelle is right now. It's a constant internal battle.
This is going to be a weird question. I'm trying to figure out the best way to word it. It would be wonderful if she was found alive and safe and well. But the reality of thinking she's still alive and not living how she wants to has got to be difficult. Would there be any comfort in finding her but knowing that she has passed and is at peace, as opposed to living what could be a tortured life by not how she wants to live it?
Yeah, personally, I believe, I don't like to speak out of turn for my family, but I think we're all kind of on the same page that if she has passed, at least she's not going through literal hell. It gives me comfort. My son knows her as Aunt Mikelle the Angel. It's an easy way for him to understand. He knows that when she was a child that someone bad took her, and that we never found her. And for me, yeah, I've gotten some flack for saying, I hope she passed, because why would I hope that she's being tortured?
Kimber's son is about to turn 9 years old, the same age she was when she lost Mikelle. It's a daunting feeling.
I didn't think that him turning 9 would be hard for me, but it just puts it in perspective. The way my world was shattered at 9 years old, I don't want that for him.
Despite years and years of questions going unanswered and grief of missing someone who meant so much to her, she hasn't given up hope.
If we don't find her body, there is a very good chance that we'll never know. And it's that ugly truth you don't want to look at. I think it comes down to finding her body. I feel like nothing stays hidden forever. And, nothing stays a secret. We've always said somebody knows something. So at some point, I feel like it has to come out. Regardless of what happened and who's responsible, we will find out what happened.
Whoever took Mikelle that day didn't just take a little girl. They took an entire community's sense of safety.
I remember what it was like playing out here. I remember how I felt about the neighborhood before she was taken versus afterwards. It changed.
For a while, they took Kimber's voice, too.
I bet there's not a day that goes by that you don't miss having your sister around. You miss her a lot?
It kind of forced me to grow up in ways that no 9-year-old should have to grow up.
But she isn't 9 years old anymore. She's 31, stronger, wiser, tenacious. She won't stop fighting until she finds the truth and brings her big sister home.
For me, I still want to know who did it, and I personally will not be satisfied until I know who did it. I mean, justice is served.
If you have any information or tips related to the Mikelle Biggs case, please call the Mesa, Arizona Police Department. True Crime Arizona, the podcast, is hosted by me, Brianna Whitney, produced by Sergio Hernandez, edited by Shane Egan. It's a production of Arizona's Family, 3TV, CBS 5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona. To watch the video version on your smart TV, download the free AZ Family streaming news app.
Before Shopify, were you wondering, where are my sales at? Now you're selling with Shopify, the global commerce platform supercharging your selling. You have no problem selling online, in person, on social media, and beyond. Gary, easy on the cha-ching.
Oh, sorry, but my Shopify sales are through the roof.
Start selling with Shopify today and discover how millions of businesses around the world use Shopify to ignite their selling. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/listen. Shopify.com/listen.